It started with a look. One stupid, split-second glance across the classroom that changed everything. I remember it like it was yesterday, first period, brand new school year, still getting used to the way the desks were arranged and where the best seat was if you wanted to avoid eye contact with the teacher. Jason was already there, of course, sitting beside me like he always did, flipping through his notebook and humming some song under his breath. He had this way of making even the most boring mornings feel lighter, just by being there. We'd been best friends since middle school, the kind who didn't need words to understand each other, the kind who could sit in silence for an hour and still feel completely connected. But then he walked in. Alex. Transfer student. New face. Tall, dark hair, sharp jawline, eyes that looked like they could see straight into your soul. He stepped into the room like he belonged everywhere and nowhere all at once. The teacher introduced him, gave him a quick rundown of where we were in the lesson, and then pointed him toward the only empty seat left in the class, the one directly across from me. I don't know why my heart skipped when our eyes met. I don't know why I suddenly felt like I needed to fix my posture or brush my hair out of my face or pretend like I hadn't just been caught staring. It wasn't like I hadn't seen cute guys before. Hell, Jason and I used to make fun of the ones we thought were trying too hard. But Alex wasn't trying, he just was. And somehow, that made it worse. He sat down without saying much, just gave me a small nod and a half smile like he knew something I didn't. I nodded back, feeling my face heat up slightly, which annoyed me because I never blushed. Not over anyone, not even girls I liked back when I still thought I was supposed to like girls. Jason noticed, of course. He always noticed things like that. He leaned toward me slightly, just enough that our shoulders touched, and whispered, "New guy's got potential." I rolled my eyes, trying to play it cool. "Yeah, sure, whatever." He smirked, nudging my arm. "You're checking him out." "I'm not," I shot back, maybe a little too quickly. Jason laughed quietly, shaking his head like he knew better. And maybe he did. Maybe he saw it before I even realized it myself, that something about Alex was different. That something about the way he looked at me made me feel like I mattered in a way I hadn't before. The rest of the class passed in a blur. I tried to focus on what the teacher was saying, really did. But every time I glanced up, Alex was looking at me again. Not staring, not in a creepy way, but just watching. Like he was trying to figure me out. Like he saw something worth knowing. And I hated how much I liked it. When the bell finally rang, signaling the end of class, I packed up slowly, pretending I wasn't waiting to see if Alex would say anything to me on his way out. He didn't. Just grabbed his bag and followed the flow of students heading toward the door. But as he passed my desk, he glanced at me one last time. And this time, he smiled. A real one. Not the half smile from earlier, not the polite nod. This one reached his eyes. I felt it in my chest. Jason was already standing by the time I snapped out of it, slinging his backpack over one shoulder and giving me that same knowing smirk from earlier. "Yeah," he said, walking backward toward the door. "You're totally not checking him out." I groaned, grabbing my stuff and following him out. "Shut up." He laughed, bumping his shoulder against mine as we walked down the hallway. "Seriously though, he seems cool." I hesitated, glancing back toward the direction Alex had gone. "Yeah," I admitted quietly. "He does." That night, I told Jason everything. About how weird it felt having someone look at me like that. About how I couldn't stop thinking about the way Alex had smiled. About how, for the first time in a long time, I felt like someone saw me, not just the version of me I showed to the world, but the real one. The one I barely even understood myself. And Jason, he listened, nodded, laughed at the right parts. Even teased me a little about how fast I was falling. But what I didn't realize then, what neither of us realized, was that Jason wasn't just listening. He was feeling it too. And somewhere between that first glance and the moment I told him how I felt, he had already fallen too. We both tried to pretend it wasn't happening. Tried to act like what we were feeling was just a passing thing, the kind of crush that fades after a week or two when reality sets in and life goes back to normal. But it didn't fade. If anything, it got worse. Jason and I had always been close, best friends since middle school, inseparable even when other people didn't understand how two guys could be that connected without being more than friends. We knew each other's moods, could read each other's silences, finished each other's sentences without even trying. And for as long as I could remember, that was enough. More than enough. I never thought about wanting something else, never questioned why I didn't get butterflies the same way other guys did around girls. I figured I just hadn't met the right person yet. But then Alex walked into our classroom, and everything changed. At first, Jason didn't say anything. Didn't admit it outright. Just started acting different. He'd show up at lunch earlier than usual, making sure he got a seat next to Alex before I even had a chance to sit down. He'd laugh louder at Alex's jokes, lean in closer when they talked, find reasons to touch his arm or shoulder like it was nothing. And maybe to him, it was nothing. Maybe he didn't realize how obvious it was until I started noticing it too. I told myself I was imagining things. That Jason was just being friendly. That he liked Alex the same way I liked him, like a friend who might turn into something more, but not in a way that meant he wanted him the way I did. But deep down, I knew better. It wasn't just the way Jason looked at him. It was the way he talked about him. How he brought him up in every conversation, how he remembered little details about what Alex liked, what music he listened to, what classes he had. Jason never paid attention to those kinds of things unless it mattered. And it mattered. One afternoon, after another day of watching them talk and laugh while I sat quietly beside them, I finally asked Jason about it. We were walking home from school, the sun starting to dip behind the buildings, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. Jason had his hands stuffed into his hoodie pockets, humming softly under his breath like he always did when he was lost in thought. "Do you like him?" I asked, keeping my voice casual even though my heart was pounding. He blinked, glancing over at me like he hadn't expected the question. "Like who?" I rolled my eyes. "You know who." Jason hesitated, his steps slowing slightly. For a second, I thought he was going to deny it. Thought he was going to brush it off with one of his usual jokes, the kind that made everything feel lighter. But instead, he exhaled slowly and looked away. "I don't know," he admitted quietly. "Maybe." That was all it took. Just 3 words, spoken in that soft, uncertain tone of his, and suddenly the air between us felt heavier. Like something had shifted, something neither of us could take back. I swallowed hard, nodding slowly. "Yeah," I murmured. "Me too." Jason stopped, walking completely then, turning to face me fully. His expression was unreadable, part surprise, part understanding, part something else I couldn't name. "You do?" he asked, almost like he hadn't really believed it until I said it out loud. I nodded again, forcing myself to meet his gaze. "Yeah, I think I've liked him since the first day." He let out a quiet breath, shaking his head slightly. "Man, this is messed up." I let out a bitter laugh. "Tell me about it." For a while, neither of us spoke. We just stood there on the sidewalk, surrounded by the sounds of the neighborhood, the distant hum of cars, the occasional bark of a dog from somewhere nearby, as if the world kept moving forward while ours had come to a screeching halt. Then Jason ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "What do we do now?" I didn't have an answer. Because I didn't know. I didn't know how 2 best friends could both fall for the same guy. Didn't know how to navigate the space between love and friendship when both felt like they were slipping through my fingers. I shook my head. "I don't know." Jason studied me for a long moment before finally speaking again. "You can't tell him." I frowned. "What? You can't tell Alex?" he repeated, voice firm. "Not yet." I stared at him, confused. "Why not?" He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Because, I don't want to ruin this before it even starts." I blinked at him, realization slowly sinking in. "Wait, you're saying you're actually going to try something?" Jason hesitated, looking away again. "I don't know. Maybe. I need time to figure things out." I swallowed hard, nodding slowly. "Okay." He looked at me then, searching my face like he was trying to gauge my reaction. "Are you okay with that?" I forced a smile, shrugging like it didn't matter. "Yeah, of course. You should do whatever feels right." But inside, I felt like I was breaking apart. Because I knew what would happen. Knew that once Jason decided to make a move, I wouldn't stand a chance. And somehow, even though I had just agreed to step aside, I already regretted it. We both tried to pretend like nothing had changed. Like the conversation we'd had on that sidewalk hadn't shifted something fundamental between us. But it had. It had asterisk. Jason started spending more time with Alex. Not just in class or at lunch, but outside of school too. They went to the park together after class. Texted late into the night. Laughed about inside jokes I wasn't part of anymore. And every time I saw them together, every time Jason leaned in a little too close or Alex smiled at something only he had said, I felt like I was being erased. But I didn't say anything. I told myself I couldn't be mad. Told myself I had agreed to this. That I had given him permission to go after what he wanted. That if Alex ended up choosing Jason over me, then that was just how it was supposed to be. Except, it didn't feel fair. It didn't feel fair that Jason got to take the first step. That he got to test the waters while I stood on the sidelines and watched. That he got to be the one who made Alex laugh, who made him look at someone the way I wished he would look at me. And worst of all, it didn't feel like Jason even realized what he was doing to me. One afternoon, I found them sitting together in the courtyard during lunch break, laughing over something I couldn't hear. Jason had his legs stretched out in front of him, arms behind his head, looking completely at ease. Alex was leaning against the wall beside him, eyes bright, smile wide, completely caught up in whatever they were talking about. I hesitated before walking over, unsure if I should interrupt or just walk away. But Jason spotted me first, waving me over with a grin. "Hey man," he called. "Come sit." I forced a smile, dropping down beside him like everything was normal. Like my heart wasn't pounding because Alex was right there, close enough that I could smell the faint scent of his shampoo mixing with the warmth of his skin. "Just telling him about that time you fell off your bike in middle school," Jason said, nudging my shoulder playfully. I groaned. "You still bring that up?" Alex laughed. "Wait, really? You fell off your bike?" Jason nodded enthusiastically. In front of literally everyone. He face planted so hard he had grass stains for a week. I rolled my eyes, shaking my head. Okay, I get it. I was 12. I was learning." Alex grinned. "Still funny though." I looked at him, watching the way his eyes crinkled slightly when he laughed, how his voice carried that soft, easy tone that made everything feel lighter. And I hated how much I liked it. Hated how much I liked him. Asterisk. Jason must have noticed me staring, because he suddenly elbowed me lightly. "Dude, you're zoning out again." I blinked, snapping back to reality. "What? No, I'm not." He smirked. "Yeah, you are. You always do that when you're thinking too hard." I shook my head, forcing another smile. "Just tired." Alex tilted his head slightly, studying me. "You okay?" I nodded quickly. "Yeah, just been a long day." He gave me a small smile, like he believed me. Or maybe like he didn't, but decided not to push. Jason, on the other hand, just shrugged and went back to whatever story he was telling, leaving me sitting there with my hands clenched in my lap, trying to pretend like my chest wasn't tightening with something I couldn't name. That night, Jason showed up at my house unannounced, which wasn't unusual. He used to just let himself in without knocking, plopping onto my bed like he belonged there. But tonight, he seemed different. Quieter. He sat down on the edge of my bed, hands resting between his knees, staring at the floor like it held all the answers. "You've been weird lately," he finally said. I frowned, setting my phone aside. "Weird how?" He shrugged. "Just distant. Like you're not really here most of the time." I hesitated. "I don't know. I guess I've just been tired." Jason let out a quiet breath, shaking his head. "No, it's not that." I swallowed hard, knowing where this was going but hoping he wouldn't say it outright. He turned to look at me then, expression unreadable. "Is it about Alex?" My stomach dropped. I didn't answer right away. Just stared at him, feeling my pulse hammering in my ears. Jason exhaled slowly. "Man, you still like him, don't you?" I wanted to lie. Wanted to tell him no, that I was fine with him taking the lead, that I had moved on. But I couldn't. Instead, I whispered, "Yeah." Jason closed his eyes briefly, like he already knew this was coming. Then he opened them again, rubbing a hand down his face. "Shit." I shook my head. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen." He let out a bitter laugh. "Yeah, neither did I." There was a long silence between us, filled with everything we weren't saying. Finally, he muttered, "This is such a mess." I nodded once. "I know." He studied me for a moment before speaking again. "You can't tell him." I blinked. What? You can't tell Alex how you feel, Jason repeated, voice low. Not yet. I frowned. Why not? Because, he hesitated, running a hand through his hair. Because I think he might actually like me. My heart stopped. What? I barely managed to whisper. Jason sighed. I don't know for sure. But he's been giving me these looks. Like, real ones. And he texts me sometimes, just random stuff. And yesterday, he asked if I wanted to hang out alone. I felt like I was falling. Like the ground had disappeared beneath me and I was plummeting into something I couldn't stop. Jason looked at me then, searching my face. I don't want to ruin this before it even starts. I swallowed hard, nodding slowly. Okay. He hesitated. Are you okay with this? I forced a smile, even though it felt like my heart was breaking. Yeah, of course. But as he stood up and walked toward the door, I stared at the space where he had been sitting, feeling the weight of what he had just said settle deep in my chest. Because now I knew. Now I knew that Alex might actually choose Jason. And I wasn't sure I could survive that. That party changed everything. It wasn't supposed to be a big deal, just some random weekend get-together at someone's house while their parents were out of town. The kind of thing that happened every few weeks, where the music was too loud, the lights were dimmed just enough to make everything feel reckless, and drinks were passed around like they meant nothing. Jason had been hesitant to go at first, but Alex had texted him earlier in the day asking if he was coming, and once that message came through, there was no way he wasn't showing up. I didn't want to go. Not really. I knew what would happen the second we walked through that door. Knew that Jason and Alex would gravitate toward each other the way they always did now, leaving me on the sidelines with my hands shoved into my hoodie pockets, pretending I didn't care. But I went anyway, because even though I knew I didn't stand a chance, I still wanted to be near him. Still wanted to see the way his eyes lit up when he laughed. Still wanted to watch the way he moved through a room like he belonged everywhere and nowhere all at once. The house was already packed by the time we got there. Music thumped through the walls, mixing with the sound of voices, laughter, the occasional shout from someone trying to be heard over the noise. Jason grabbed my arm as we stepped inside, shouting something about finding something to drink before disappearing into the crowd. I wandered through the rooms, half-heartedly accepting a soda from someone I barely recognized before leaning against the kitchen counter and watching the chaos unfold around me. People danced, talked, flirted, kissed, lost themselves in the night like it was something they could hold on to forever. And then I saw him. Asterisk. Alex stood near the back of the kitchen, surrounded by a group of people who were laughing at whatever story he was telling. He looked relaxed, comfortable, like he had always belonged in places like this. His dark hair was slightly messy, probably from running his hands through it one too many times, and his shirt clung to his frame just enough to make it hard to look away. Jason was already beside him. Of course he was. They were talking, close enough that their arms brushed occasionally, close enough that Jason leaned in just slightly whenever Alex said something that made him laugh. And every time that happened, something inside me twisted. I told myself to walk away. Told myself I didn't need to keep torturing myself with this. But my feet stayed rooted in place, my fingers tightening around the can in my hand until the metal crinkled under my grip. Then, somehow, Alex caught my eye. He smiled. Just a small one, barely noticeable in the dim lighting, but it was enough to send a jolt through my chest. And then he said something to Jason, clapped him on the shoulder, and started walking toward me. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay still even though every instinct screamed for me to run. He stopped a few feet away, tilting his head slightly as he studied me. Hey, he said, voice low enough that I had to lean in to hear him over the music. You've been quiet tonight. I shrugged, trying to play it off. Just not much of a party person. He smirked slightly. Yeah, then why'd you come? I hesitated, unsure how honest I wanted to be. Didn't have much of a choice. He chuckled softly, glancing briefly toward where Jason was still standing with the others before looking back at me. You okay? I nodded quickly. Yeah, just tired. He didn't look convinced, but he didn't press. Instead, he took a step closer, lowering his voice just enough that only I could hear him. You know, you don't have to stay over here by yourself. I blinked at him, surprised by the words. What do you mean? He tilted his head toward the rest of the group. Come hang out with us. I hesitated again, glancing toward Jason, who was still deep in conversation with someone else. If I walked over there with Alex, it would change things. Would blur the lines even more than they already were. But I couldn't say no. Not when Alex was looking at me like that. So I followed him across the kitchen, stepping into the circle of people like I belonged there. Jason glanced up as we approached, his smile faltering slightly when he saw that Alex had brought me along. No one seemed to notice the shift in energy except me. We ended up standing next to each other for most of the night, passing around jokes, sharing stories, laughing at things that probably weren't that funny. And somehow, without meaning to, I found myself leaning into the moment. Letting myself believe, even just for a little while, that maybe Alex actually wanted me here. Maybe he saw something in me that Jason didn't. Maybe I wasn't completely invisible after all. At some point, the group started moving toward the backyard, drawn outside by the cool air and the faint glow of fairy lights strung up around the patio. I followed behind, keeping a few steps between us, watching the way Jason and Alex walked side by side, shoulders bumping occasionally, easy in each other's presence. I hated how natural it looked. Hated how much I wanted to be the one standing beside him instead. Eventually, I found myself leaning against the railing near the edge of the deck, watching the stars peek through the haze of city lights. The night was warmer than expected, but I still felt cold, like something inside me had gone numb. Then, out of nowhere, Alex appeared beside me. He didn't say anything at first, just leaned against the railing beside me, staring up at the sky like he was searching for something. After a long pause, he finally spoke. "You're different when we're alone." I turned to look at him, confused. "What do you mean?" He smirked slightly. "Like right now. You talk more, laugh more, you're not hiding." I swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. He turned to face me fully then, expression softening. "Why do you do that?" "Hide, I mean." I shook my head. "I don't know." He studied me for a moment before speaking again. "You should stop." I frowned. "Stop what?" "Hiding." His voice was quieter now, almost gentle. "You're worth seeing." I felt something tighten in my chest. Before I could respond, he reached out, slowly, carefully, and brushed his fingers against mine. It was barely a touch, just the lightest brush of skin against skin, but it sent a shiver through me. And then, before I could process what was happening, he leaned in. His lips met mine softly, gently, like he was testing the waters, like he wasn't sure if I would pull away. But I didn't. Instead, I kissed him back. Just once. Just long enough to feel it, to feel him, before he pulled away, eyes searching mine like he was waiting for me to say something. I couldn't find the words. All I could do was stare at him, heart pounding, breath uneven, knowing in that moment that everything had changed. And that Jason wouldn't be able to ignore it anymore. I don't remember walking back inside. I only remember the way my heart pounded in my chest, how my lips still tingled from the kiss, how every breath felt heavier than before. It wasn't just that it had happened, it was everything it meant. Everything had changed. Alex didn't follow me right away. He stayed outside for a moment, letting me go, giving me space to process what had just happened. But I didn't need space. I needed answers. Needed to understand why he kissed me. Needed to know if it meant something or if it was just another reckless, alcohol-fueled mistake like so many others at this party. I found myself standing near the kitchen counter again, gripping the edge of it like it could keep me grounded. The music was still too loud. The lights were still too dim. People still laughed and danced like nothing had shifted beneath their feet. But everything had changed. And then Jason was there. He stepped up beside me, arms crossed, eyes scanning my face like he already knew something was wrong. "You okay?" he asked, voice quieter than usual. I nodded quickly, maybe too quickly. "Yeah, just needed some air." He studied me for a long moment before exhaling sharply. "You sure?" I forced a smile, shrugging. "Just tired." Jason didn't look convinced, but he didn't push. Instead, he turned his attention toward the group of people still gathered around the kitchen island, laughing over something someone had said. His gaze landed on Alex, who had just walked back inside, shaking water off his hands after washing them in the sink. Jason's expression shifted slightly, just enough that I noticed. A flicker of something unreadable behind his eyes. Then, without looking at me again, he muttered, "I'm gonna go talk to him." My stomach dropped. "Okay," I managed, forcing my voice to stay even. He disappeared into the crowd, leaving me standing there with my fingers curled tightly around the edge of the counter, watching as he approached Alex. Watched as they exchanged a few words, watched as Jason leaned in slightly, watched as Alex glanced briefly in my direction before saying something that made Jason laugh. It should have been normal. Should have been nothing, but it felt like everything. Because now, I had to figure out how to tell Jason what had just happened. How to explain that the guy we both liked had kissed me. Asterisk. And worse, I didn't know if I regretted it or not. The next morning, I woke up with the weight of last night pressing down on me like a physical thing. My phone buzzed on the nightstand beside me, the screen lighting up with a message I already knew I wouldn't want to read. It was from Jason. "We need to talk." That was all. No explanation, no question, just those 4 words, heavy with meaning. I stared at the ceiling for a long time, trying to find the strength to get up, to face whatever conversation was about to happen. Because I knew exactly what it was about. Knew that Jason had seen something last night, something he couldn't ignore. And now, there was no going back. When I finally made it downstairs, my mom handed me a cup of coffee without asking if I wanted one. She gave me a small, knowing look before heading off to get ready for work, like she could sense the storm brewing behind my eyes. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my untouched coffee, waiting for Jason to show up. And he did. 15 minutes later, hoodie pulled over his head, hands shoved deep into his pockets, expression unreadable. He didn't say anything at first. Just sat down across from me, placing his elbows on the table and resting his chin in his hand, watching me like he was trying to decide where to start. Finally, he exhaled. "Last night," he began, voice low. "What the hell was that?" I swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the table like it could keep me steady. "I don't know." Jason let out a short, bitter laugh. "Come on, man, don't do that." I looked up at him then, meeting his gaze fully. "I'm serious. I don't know what happened." His jaw tightened. "You expect me to believe that you just accidentally ended up kissing him?" I flinched. "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like?" His voice was sharper now, edged with something I couldn't place. I hesitated. "I don't know." "Okay." 1 second we were talking, and the next, I cut myself off, shaking my head. "It just happened." Jason let out a slow breath, rubbing a hand down his face. Jesus, man. I hated the way he looked at me in that moment, not angry, not yelling, just disappointed. Like I had broken something between us, something he hadn't expected me to break. "I didn't plan it," I whispered. "I swear." He nodded slowly, but it didn't look like he believed me. "Doesn't matter if you planned it or not. It still happened." I swallowed hard. "Yeah, I know." There was a long silence between us, filled with everything we weren't saying. Then Jason spoke again, voice softer this time. "Did you want it to happen?" I blinked at him, surprised by the question. "What?" He met my gaze directly. "Did you want to kiss him?" I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught in my throat. Because the truth was, yes, I had wanted it, even though I knew it would hurt Jason. Even though I knew it would change things between us forever. I had still wanted it. So instead of lying, I just nodded once. Yeah. Jason closed his eyes briefly, like my answer physically hurt him. Then he exhaled and leaned back in his chair. So, he chose you. I shook my head quickly. No. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? He asked, frustration creeping back into his voice. Because from where I was standing, it looked like he picked you. I didn't know what to say to that. Because maybe he had. Maybe, without realizing it, Alex had already started leaning toward me instead of Jason. And that terrified me, not because I didn't like him, but because I knew what it meant for Jason. I looked at him then, really looked at him, and saw the sadness behind his eyes. The quiet grief of losing something he thought he might actually get. I'm sorry, I whispered. Jason let out a humorless chuckle. Yeah, I know. He stood up slowly, pushing his chair back under the table. I don't think I can be around you right now. I swallowed hard, nodding. Okay. He hesitated for a second, like he wanted to say something else, but then he just shook his head and walked out the front door without another word. And I sat there, alone, staring at my untouched coffee, feeling like I had lost more than just my best friend. I had lost a part of myself. The days after the kiss were filled with silence. Not the kind of silence that comes from being alone, but the kind that settles between people who used to be close, where every unspoken word feels heavier than anything that could be said out loud. Jason barely looked at me anymore. Barely talked to me, and when he did, it was short, clipped, like he was forcing himself to say just enough to keep things from falling apart completely. I hated it. I hated how much I missed him. How much I missed the way things used to be, the easy laughter, the shared glances, the way we could sit in complete silence and still feel connected without needing words. Now, it felt like there was a wall between us, thick and unbreakable, built from something neither of us knew how to fix. And Alex, he kept pulling me closer. It wasn't intentional, at least, not in the way I wanted to believe. He texted me late at night, asking about my day, sending memes he thought I'd find funny, telling me he liked the way I laughed. He asked me to walk home with him after school, slipping his hand into mine when no one was looking, like it was the most natural thing in the world. He kissed me again, once, twice, 3 times, each time softer than the last, like he was trying to make sure I knew I was wanted. And I was wanted, but it didn't feel right. Because every time Alex touched me, every time he smiled at me like I mattered, all I could think about was Jason's face the morning after the party. The way he had looked at me like I had broken something between us that couldn't be fixed. I tried to tell myself that this was what I wanted. That if Jason had been the one to move first, then maybe this would have felt different. If maybe he had been the one Alex chose, then I wouldn't feel so torn apart inside. But deep down, I knew the truth. Even if Jason had gone first, even if Alex had chosen him instead of me, I still would have hurt. Because I didn't want to lose either of them. One afternoon, after another long day of pretending like everything was fine, I found Jason sitting alone by his locker, stuffing books inside without saying a word. I hesitated for only a second before stepping up beside him, taking a deep breath. Talk to me, I said quietly. He didn't look at me at first. Just closed his locker slowly, turning to face me with an expression I couldn't read. What do you want me to say? He asked, voice low. That I'm happy for you. That I'm okay with this. I swallowed hard. I never meant to hurt you. Jason let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. Yeah, I know. I clenched my jaw, hating the way that sounded, like he already knew I was going to end up with Alex, like he had accepted it even though it was tearing him apart. I didn't plan for any of this to happen, I said, voice quieter now. I swear. He studied me for a long moment before exhaling sharply. Doesn't matter if you planned it or not. It still happened. I nodded slowly, because he was right. It didn't matter if I had meant for it to happen. It still did. And now, I had to live with it. Jason shifted slightly, crossing his arms over his chest. You really like him, don't you? I blinked at him, surprised by the question. What? You heard me. His voice was steady, but there was something behind it, something raw. Do you really like him? Or are you just doing this because you can? I shook my head quickly. No, I do like him. I don't know how else to explain it. It just happened. Jason let out a slow breath, rubbing the back of his neck. So what now? I hesitated. I don't know. He gave me a small, humorless smile. Of course you don't. I swallowed hard, watching him carefully. What about us? His eyes flickered slightly, like the question hit harder than he expected. What about us? I frowned. Are we still friends? Jason let out a quiet sigh, shaking his head. I don't know, man. I feel like I'm losing you. I flinched. You're not. He looked at me then, really looked at me, like he was searching for something. Then why does it feel like I already did? I didn't have an answer for that. Because he was right. It did feel like he was losing me. Like I was slipping further and further away, pulled towards someone else without realizing how much I was leaving behind. And I hated it. Hated that I couldn't have both. Hated that I had to choose between the person I loved and the person I had always loved. Jason exhaled again, running a hand through his hair. I need some space. I swallowed hard. Okay. He nodded once before walking away, disappearing into the hallway before I could say anything else. And I stood there, staring at the empty space where he had been, feeling like I was losing more than just my best friend. I was losing the person who had always known me better than anyone else. Things got worse after that. Jason stopped coming to lunch with us. Stopped answering my calls. Stopped acting like we were friends at all. And Alex, he kept drawing me in deeper. We started spending more time together, walking home together after school, hanging out on weekends, lying side by side in my backyard while the sun dipped below the horizon, talking about everything and nothing all at once. He made me feel good. Made me feel seen. Made me feel like I belonged somewhere. But every time I looked at him, every time he kissed me, every time he whispered my name like it meant something, all I could think about was Jason. About how much he must have been hurting. About how much I was hurting him. Asterisk. And worst of all, about how little I seemed to care. One night, after another evening spent tangled in Alex's arms, I called him and told him I couldn't keep doing this. I didn't cry, didn't yell, just sat on my bed, phone pressed to my ear, voice quiet as I said, I can't be with you if it means losing him. There was a pause on the other line. Then Alex sighed softly, you need to figure out what matters most to you. I didn't answer, just hung up and stared at the ceiling, wondering if I had made the biggest mistake of my life. Because even though I had walked away from Alex, I still hadn't fixed things with Jason. And I didn't know if I ever could. The next morning, I went to his house. Showed up at his doorstep without warning, hands shoved into my hoodie pockets, heart pounding against my ribs. He opened the door slowly, blinking at me like he hadn't expected to see me. I took a deep breath. I broke up with him. Jason's eyes widened slightly. What? I nodded once. I ended it. He didn't say anything at first. Just stood there, watching me, waiting for me to explain. I swallowed hard, because I can't lose you. For a long moment, he just stared at me, like he was trying to decide if I was telling the truth. Then, finally, he stepped aside and gestured for me to come in. And I did, because sometimes, love isn't about who you want to be with. Sometimes, it's about who you can't imagine living without. And for me, that person had always been Jason. Time passed. Slowly at first, like we were both testing the waters, unsure if we could trust each other again. Jason and I didn't talk about Alex for a long time after that day at his house. We didn't need to. The silence between us was enough, thick with everything we had lost, everything we had broken, and everything we were still trying to rebuild. We started small, lunches together again, walking home from school like we used to, laughing over stupid things, letting the quiet moments stretch without feeling the weight of what had happened pressing down on us. It wasn't like before, not exactly. There were still gaps in our friendship, places where the oldies had faded and hadn't quite returned. But we were trying, and sometimes, that was all we could do. I missed Alex, not in the way I thought I would, like a missing limb or a hole in my chest, but more like a memory you carry around with you, something soft and painful tucked away in the corners of your mind. I thought about him sometimes, especially late at night when the house was quiet and the world felt too big. Thought about the way he kissed me like I mattered. Thought about how it felt to be wanted by someone who didn't know the whole story, who didn't see the cracks beneath the surface. But I never reached out. Because no matter how much I missed him, I knew I had made the right choice. Knew that losing Jason would have been worse than losing anyone else. And slowly, I started believing that again. It was strange how normal life became again. How easy it was to fall back into the rhythm of things once the tension eased. Jason stopped walking on eggshells around me. He teased me again, nudged my shoulder when I zoned out during class, called me out when I was being dumb. And I did the same to him. We weren't perfect, we never would be, but we were healing. One afternoon, we were sitting outside after school, sprawled out on the grass behind the bleachers like we used to in middle school. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the field, and the air smelled like spring, like fresh cut grass and warm pavement. Jason rolled onto his side, propping himself up on one elbow as he looked at me. You ever think about him? He asked quietly. I blinked at him, surprised by the question. Alex. He nodded, not looking away. I hesitated, staring up at the sky. Sometimes. Jason let out a quiet breath, nodding like he expected that answer. Me too. I turned my head to look at him then, frowning slightly. You do. He shrugged. Yeah, not in a bad way. Just, I don't know. It's weird, right? Like, he was part of this thing that almost broke us, but he was also kind of the reason we figured some stuff out. I swallowed hard, thinking about that. Thinking about how tangled everything had become. How messy it had gotten. How much pain had come from one kiss, one choice, one moment that changed everything. Do you regret it? I asked softly. Jason was quiet for a long time before answering. Not really. I mean, I wish it didn't hurt so much. I wish I didn't feel like I lost something I barely even got to have. But, I don't regret liking him. I don't regret falling for him. I nodded slowly. Same. He gave me a small smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. Guess we're both just cursed when it comes to guys like him. I chuckled softly, shaking my head. Yeah, guess so. For a while, neither of us spoke. Just lay there, watching the sky shift from orange to deep blue, listening to the distant sound of cars passing by. Then Jason said, you think he ever thinks about us? I glanced at him, raising an eyebrow. You mean like, together? He shrugged. No, not like that. Just, like, does he remember us? Does he wonder what happened after we stopped talking? I thought about that. Thought about Alex, wherever he was now. Whether he had moved on. Found someone new. Built something real with someone who didn't come with baggage and broken pieces. I hope he does, I admitted quietly. I hope he remembers us the way we remember him. Jason tilted his head slightly, studying me. You still love him? I considered the question carefully before answering. I think I loved what he made me feel. What he made me believe about myself. Jason nodded like he understood. Same. We stayed outside until the sky was fully dark, the stars blinking into view above us. Eventually, Jason sat up, stretching his arms above his head. Come on, he said, standing. Let's go get something to eat. I groaned, pushing myself up off the grass. You're always hungry. He smirked. That's why you keep me around. I rolled my eyes, brushing grass off my jeans. Sure, that's definitely it. We walked toward the parking lot, shoulders bumping occasionally, the way they always used to. And even though things would never be exactly the way they were before, I realized something important in that moment. We were okay. Not perfect. Not untouched by everything that had happened. But okay. And maybe, for now, that was enough. Weeks turned into months. School kept going. Life kept moving forward, whether we were ready for it or not. Jason and I didn't bring up Alex again, not directly. But sometimes, when we were alone, I'd catch him looking at his phone longer than usual, or I'd hear him laugh at something someone said that reminded me of the way Alex used to smile. We never talked about it. Never asked questions we weren't sure we wanted answers to. But I knew Jason still thought about him sometimes. And I knew I did too. But we had each other. And somehow, that felt like the most important thing. Because love doesn't always look the way you expect it to. Sometimes, it's not the person you thought you wanted. Sometimes, it's the person who stays. The person who fights for you even when everything gets messy. The person who chooses you, even when it hurts. And for me, that person had always been Jason. Even if it took losing something good to realize how much I couldn't lose him. Time passed, and life kept moving forward. Not always in a straight line, sometimes it felt more like circles, like we were always circling back to the same place, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. But even with all the mess, all the pain, all the choices that didn't feel right at the time, I still believed in what we had. Jason and I never fully went back to how things were before. Some things can't be undone. Some wounds leave scars, but we found our way back to friendship, even if it looked different now. We didn't talk about Alex. Didn't bring up the past unless it came up naturally. But we were there for each other again. And that meant something. Sometimes, when I closed my eyes at night, I thought about him, Alex. About the way he smiled, the way he kissed me like I mattered, the way his voice softened when he said my name. I wondered where he was now. If he had moved on. Found someone new. Built something real with someone who didn't come with baggage and broken pieces. I hoped he was happy. I hoped he remembered us. Because I knew I never would forget him. But even though I missed him, even though I sometimes wished things could have been easier, I also knew one undeniable truth. I couldn't have lost Jason. Not for anyone. Not for anything. Because love doesn't always look the way you expect it to. Sometimes, it's not the person you thought you wanted. Sometimes, it's the person who stays. The person who fights for you even when everything gets messy. The person who chooses you, even when it hurts. And for me, that person had always been Jason. Even if it took losing something good to realize how much I couldn't lose him. Years passed. We graduated high school, went our separate ways for college. Lived different lives, met new people, made new friends. But no matter how far apart we got, no matter how much time passed between calls or visits, Jason was always there. Always just a phone call away. Still my best friend. Still the person who knew me better than anyone else. Still the person I owed everything to. One afternoon, years after everything had settled into something quieter, I found myself sitting across from him in a small cafe near campus, sipping coffee and watching the sunlight stream through the windows. He was telling some ridiculous story about his roommate, laughing so hard he nearly knocked over his cup. I smiled, shaking my head. You're such an idiot. He grinned, nudging my arm. Yeah, but you love it. I rolled my eyes, but I didn't argue. Because he was right. I did love it. I loved him. Asterisk. Not in the way people usually mean when they say that word, not in the way that leads to kisses in dark hallways or tangled hands behind closed doors, but in a deeper, quieter way. The kind of love that builds homes out of memories and laughter. The kind of love that survives heartbreak and silence and every mistake you've ever made. I loved him because he stayed. Because he fought for me even when I didn't deserve it. Because he chose me, even when it hurt. And I would spend the rest of my life being grateful for that. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. If you're going through something similar, if you're stuck between love and loyalty, between a friend and a feeling, you're not alone. These stories matter. Your pain matters. Your choices matter. Keep living, keep healing, keep believing in love. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. Share it if it touched you. And remember, your story is worth telling.